When a prestigious app developer began to hang around with a very frisky, high-class group of druggies and perverts, you could say that he fell into a bad crowd. Thanks to his meeting of one socialite within this crowd, his entire life would go down the drain. With all of the talks of CEO murders lately, there was the story of one pretty high-profile individual that flew under the radar for many, that being one of the founders of CashApp. In fact, this man, Bob Lee, worked on a lot of different applications and operating systems that you've probably heard of. This case is different, though, in that it's not so much related to his job and his money, but more to his personal life and the people he associated with. Bob Lee, from St. Louis, Missouri, was always into tech. His first claim to fame was when he wrote a computer program that could stop Code Red, a virus that was pretty infamous in the early days of the internet. He met his wife Krista there in his hometown before they both decided to move to the San Francisco Bay together for better job opportunities. There, Bob helped to develop the Android operating system while he worked at Google. Eventually, he moved on to working as the chief technology officer at Square, a payment app, before coming to help found CashApp, which really needs no introduction these days. Afterwards, he worked as an executive at Present before eventually moving on to be the chief product officer of an app called MobileCoin. He had worked himself up to a net worth of roughly $10 million. Although Bob and Krista seemed to have a happy marriage together, having a couple of kids together and all, things really stopped doing quite so well between the two. In 2019, the two divorced, with Krista staying behind in San Francisco while Bob moved to Miami to live with his father in 2022. Still though, Bob would continue to come back to California for both business and to see his kids fairly frequently. Nema Momeni was another tech entrepreneur living in the area. Born in 1984 and raised in Iran, he didn't have the best upbringing. His father was abusive to both him and his sister, causing him to be much more close with his sister and mom. He was also bullied fairly often as a kid, leading to him studying martial arts as a result in hopes to defend himself. Unfortunately, this would gradually lead him down a pretty bad path, giving him quite the interest in guns, knives, and lots of cocaine. Nema eventually escaped Iran, moving to the Bay Area for high school and staying there ever since. He came to run his own IT consulting firm. This firm was called Expand IT. Taking one look at his lifestyle, you'd never assume that he was up to anything nefarious. He was in a pretty fancy place with high ceilings, big bay windows, a pool table, high-quality stereo, and a bunch of gourmet food, after all. However, while Nema had several employees working for him, his business was actually struggling. Not only that, but the turnover rate was pretty high. It seemed that people didn't really enjoy working for him. Some of his neighbors felt pretty similarly about him, especially after all of the loud, wild parties he threw, with one of them tweeting, "All the neighbors hated this guy. He was rude, stunk up the hallways with his cigs, which was illegal, yelled all the time, completely inconsiderate, refused to pay rent for 4 or 5 months, just an awful human being." Another neighbor described him as, "Tough guy, training all the time, super into weapons," noting that he had a lot of knives strewn about what he confidently called his bachelor pad. It wasn't all about being an inconsiderate dillweed, though. Nema also had a lot of run-ins with the police over the last decade or so. For example, in 2004 he was arrested for driving drunk, and in 2011 he was arrested again for selling a switchblade knife, which were illegal in his area. The maximum sentence he ever ended up with was for that knife incident, which landed him about 10 days in jail. Bob and Nema came to know each other through a woman, Nema's sister, Kazar. While Bob had been living in Miami, he had known Kazar from even before that. Kazar Elasnia was a socialite and the wife of a prestigious plastic surgeon named Dino Elasnia. Both Bob and Kazar hung around a very wild crowd, both said to be part of a group called The Lifestyle, which is described as an underground party scene featuring recreational drug use and casual sex. So basically they were into one of those elite orgy cults that you tend to hear about from time to time. While Kazar was married, she was also pretty vocal about being in an open relationship. It has been assumed that she and Bob at least had a few different encounters over the years, with the two being fairly close and Bob coming back to visit her whenever he was in the area. Another friend of Bob's, named Terena Ipachki, said that the two seemed to have met in 2020, and according to friends, they seemed to have a romantic spark for a while. Terena, speaking of Bob's more freaky side, said, "He liked to, unfortunately, do a lot of drugs, but he was the sweetest guy ever. He always had this light around him. Unfortunately, it seems that this is what brought him to meet Kazar. Kazar was a person who has been described as more or less unstable. While she would play cute most of the time, she would turn on a dime and begin yelling at those around her, saying all manner of horrible things before coming back to apologize a few weeks later. Even her brother, Nema, once told her to get sober and apologized for the way she spoke to him, only to be told, "Go fucking die," in response. Kazar had many of her own run-ins with the law as well over time. In November of 2022, she was arrested on both DUI and hit-and-run charges after plowing into another car in San Francisco. A witness told the media that she was, in their own words, high as hell. Footage also showed some whippets lying in plain sight in the front seat of her car by her purse. She tried to play cute and innocent while the cops arrested her, pleading, "You're not taking me in, right? But I'm not going anywhere. Why are you placing me in handcuffs? But that means, are you taking me to jail?" Kazar would fly off the handle so often that people were so used to being blocked by her that they would simply contact her through another app as if nothing had happened and she would respond normally, until she would explode, block them on that app as well, and force them to find another way to contact her the next time. Kazar would usually blame drugs for how she treated people as if it would all be forgiven that way. Bob had much of this experience with Kazar as well. With her having blocked his phone number for whatever reason, he simply contacted her on WhatsApp. He told her that he was going to be in town for the Mobile Coin Leadership Summit, saying that he was staying a few extra nights to see friends if she wanted to meet up. While Bob, his friend Bo Mohazabi, and Kazar were hanging out together one night while Bob was in town, the three met up with a drug dealer named Jeremy Boyven. All ready to partake, Kazar gobbled up some GHB, a central nervous system depressant usually used in much the same manner as roofies. Kazar said that, while she was high, she didn't know which country or even what planet she was on. She did say that Jeremy Boyven grabbed her butt at this time, though. By then, Bob and Bo Mohazabi had left as Kazar said that Bo was making her uncomfortable. As they left, Kazar's friend Aranza Villegas arrived. Aranza later said that she was being very dramatic that whole evening. Eventually, Kazar called her brother Nema and her husband Dino to come pick her up and rescue her. One night later, Kazar's husband Dino was furious to come home and see Kazar in their marital bed with none other than Jeremy Boyven. While the two were indeed open, they had certain rules. More than that, though, Jeremy was supposedly the man that had just sexually assaulted her the night before that he needed to save her from. Nema, as overprotective of his sister as always, felt that all of the blame for this should be placed onto Bob Lee himself, not on Kazar or even on Jeremy, given that Bob had introduced her to Jeremy. He felt that Bob had gotten his little sister, who was 40 years old at the time of this story, into doing drugs and associating with bad people, despite the fact that she had been a part of the scene for years at this point. Nevertheless, Nema felt that only Bob was to blame and began to hyper-focus on him specifically. The next afternoon, leading into the night, while Bob was still in San Francisco, he decided to hit up another party. Bob, Bo, and Kazar were all drinking together at an apartment in the Mission District. After a few hours, Bob and Bo decided to dip and head to Bob's hotel to hang out, asking Kazar to come with them. She declined. While they were in the hotel room, Bob got a call from Nema, one that Bo described as interrogating. The phone call appeared to be about Nema picking his sister up from the house that they had previously been at, with Nema grilling Bob on whether or not she was doing drugs or anything else inappropriate. Bob said that, to his knowledge, she hadn't been. Eventually, Bob left his hotel room and went outside. There, Nema had pulled up in his BMW. For reasons unknown, at 2:03 a.m., Bob hopped into the car and the two drove off together at a fairly high speed. The BMW was seen pulling into a secluded, badly lit area before both men got out of the car and began to talk. Nema once again interrogated Bob about what his sister had been doing, still blaming him for all of her actions. Very quickly and abruptly, Nema pulled out one of his knives, rushed towards Bob, and stabbed him 5 times. It seems that Bob never saw it coming or even realized that Nema was that angry in the first place. Nema then hopped back into the car and sped away. Bob tried to get some help. He walked west up to Main Street, bleeding profusely and losing consciousness. He walked up to a parked car with its hazard lights on and begged for help, lifting up his shirt to show his stab wounds. This only freaked out the driver of the car, though, who drove away at a high speed. Bob was then seen walking around while holding his cell phone. It's believed that this was when he called the police, begging for help, shouting, "Someone stabbed me." He crossed the street at Harrison, only to wander back down towards the Poorside condo complex, leaving behind a trail of blood all the way. There, he was seen on video pacing around the door before finally collapsing to the ground. The police and paramedics arrived on the 300 block of Main Street and the Renson Hill neighborhood shortly after 2:35 a.m. They found Bob to be unconscious and with a very low pulse, giving agonal breathing, a very bad sign. He was rushed out to San Francisco General Hospital. Arriving a little after 3 a.m., Bob had no pulse. This led to the staff beginning to prep for a transfusion. He was given an emergency thoracotomy, with the medical staff finding 2 stab wounds to his heart itself. He was then found to have an injury to the right ventricle of his heart as well as to his lung. The doctors did what they could, but it was already too late. He died there on the operating table several hours later at 6:49 a.m. The doctors were quick to note that the cause of death was due to multiple stab wounds, with medical staff noting that he had alcohol, cocaine, and ketamine in his system at the time. The police didn't immediately identify Bob Lee in the beginning. While it was still unknown what had happened to him, Kazar texted his phone the next day. She was concerned about how he ended up that night, noting that Nema had been pretty angry. She wrote, "Just wanted to make sure you're doing okay, cause I know Nema came way down hard on you. And thank you for being such a classy man, handling it with class. Love you, selfish pricks." Interestingly enough, Nema had also texted Kazar, bad-mouthing Bob and talking about how she had her butt grabbed previously. Still not knowing that he had been killed, she responded with, "Lol, you dumb fuck, Bob never touched me, no one did." Not too long after, MobileCoin themselves publicly confirmed that their chief product officer, Bob Lee, had passed away. It wasn't long before people linked him to the stabbing that had occurred previously. The San Francisco police chief gave a statement, seeming confident that they were already well on their way to finding out who had killed Bob. It seemed that they were confident that this one would be an easy solve, given what they had found already. After being asked about the investigation, the police responded with, "What I will tell you is that our homicide team is working tirelessly to get this to a resolution. We have a lot that's on our plate with this investigation and following up on things that need to be followed up on. We'll put the information out, but we don't want to do anything to compromise this investigation." Given that Bob had last been seen on camera leaving the Millennium Tower luxury apartments together with Nema in his BMW, it wasn't too hard to put 2 and 2 together. This led them to even more security camera footage of Nema leading Bob to a dark, secluded area before speeding off and leaving him with grievous bodily injuries. Police were assigned to do surveillance on Nema very shortly afterwards. They came to see that Nema was already hiring himself a private investigator outside of his attorney's office. While he talked with the man, the police couldn't quite hear him, but they noted that he made 3 different stabbing motions with his hands while talking to the investigator. The police also came to find that Kazar's husband, Dino, had also Googled how to erase an iPhone only a few days after the murder before trying to delete his own search history afterwards. Unfortunately, the police weren't able to get into the phones to see what was on them in the first place. Either way, they had gotten more than enough evidence for an arrest warrant. The police took Nema in without incident, drove him out to the San Francisco County Jail, and booked him on 1 charge of murder. It goes without saying that Nema's neighbors, although they knew he was a bit of a dick, were shocked to see him getting arrested for something like this. Nema had his first hearing in court fairly quickly after his arrest, where it was expressed that he would be given a sentence enhancement of using a knife. During the hearing, Nema was brought to the stand while Kazar and Dino watched from the stands, making heart shapes with their hands towards each other to show their support. Both of them were all set to pay for a pretty fancy legal team for him, consisting of 5 different attorneys. However, it was going to be requested that Nema not receive the option of bail. Because of that, he remained in custody from then on out. The Office of District Attorney Brooke Jenkins said that Nema Momeni was all set to end up with a sentence of 26 years to life in prison if he was convicted. Nema's trial officially began on October 14th of 2023. The district attorney opened up the trial by saying that Bob Lee was stabbed through the heart and left to die, setting emotions fairly high from the get-go. Prosecutor said that Nema stabbed Bob 3 to 5 times with a kitchen knife after driving him out to a shady area back in April. Surprisingly, Nema fully admitted to stabbing Bob. However, he said that he had done it all in self-defense, saying that Bob had pulled the knife on him first. This is how the night went according to Nema. He said that, after he picked Bob up, he realized that he had been doing some hard drugs. He pulled the car over, thinking that Bob was going to throw up. Then, Nema said that he would rather spend his night with his family rather than go to strip clubs like Bob, to which Bob flew into a rage and lunged at him with a knife. The two struggled over the knife, with Nema not even realizing that Bob had been stabbed, saying that he simply exited the car and walked away. Needless to say, nobody was really buying this story. Prosecutors instead insisted that Nema was clearly obsessed with Bob, blaming him for his sister being assaulted, something that Kazar herself wasn't even consistent on, saying shortly after the murder that nobody had touched her. The prosecution then played Bob's 911 call to the police for the first time to the jurors, letting them hear how he called for help 47 different times. Kazar was brought up to testify. There, she spent most of her time spinning a story about how she was the victim in all of this, despite the fact that she was neither murdered nor being charged with murder. She wasn't being charged with anything. She explained that she and Bob had been on a bender consisting of cocaine, whippets, alcohol, and ketamine from 3 days from April 1st to April 3rd. While saying that Jeremy Boyven had touched her butt at first, and then saying that nobody had touched her afterwards, she was now saying that he did indeed touch her and it was worse than she previously let on. She began to act as if Bob were some sort of predator now, likely to give more credence to her brother's defense. She said that while she, Bob, and Bo were at Jeremy Boyven's apartment, Bo was making her uncomfortable, so she ordered Jeremy to make Bob and Bo leave. She said that, at that point, Bob demanded that she leave with him in his Uber or she would never see him again, but she refused. She said that Jeremy then drugged her and touched her butt multiple times. She then said that, because of her father's abuse as a kid, she had a hard time discerning what abuse was, and it took her some time to realize that her butt was indeed touched. She then oddly admitted that she did keep meeting Jeremy after that, saying that he choked her and threatened to kill her on later dates. Her testimony wasn't taken very seriously. She had first said that she was so high that she didn't know what planet she was on. Then she said that she was never touched, and now she was saying that her memory was clear and that she was coherent enough to remember the whole ordeal in its entirety. The bit about her father was also completely unrelated to the case, seeming to most to be a ploy to manipulate the public into sympathy for her and her brother. Over the course of a few days, Kazar spent over 12 hours total on the stand denying that Nema had stabbed anyone in the first place, even though he and his lawyers had already fully admitted that he did. She spent a lot more time trying to portray Bob as an angry, aggressive drug addict and her as a victim, while explaining more and more why she was a victim of Bob. In order to explain why Nema had felt the need to defend her, she still denied that he had killed anyone, leading to her testimony making no sense in the first place. If Nema hadn't killed anyone, explaining her issues with Jeremy and why she needed to be defended made no sense in the first place. Jeremy Boyven was never called to testify during the trial, as the trial wasn't about Kazar despite how much she felt it was. His lawyers did tell reporters that it was obvious that Kazar had a voluntary sexual relationship with Jeremy, especially since she and her husband had just gotten into a big fight after the two were caught into bed together after the supposed assaults. His attorney, Valerie Nichet, said that Kazar's testimony was riddled with lies, saying, "She should be cross-examined on the duration and frequency of her voluntary sexual relationship with Mr. Boyven. Her testimony proves she is not a credible witness. Mr. Boyven looks forward to clearing his name at the right time and place." Bob's ex-wife, Krista, also had some harsh words for Kazar in the courtroom hallways. Calling Kazar the whore of the high tower, she said, "My husband was murdered. She has no right to make herself a victim in all of this. She can go fuck herself." Eventually, it came time for a verdict in the case. Nema's explanation of self-defense and Kazar's bizarre, irrelevant pity party weren't enough to sway the judge or jury in their favor. The judge gave a warning to all of those present to remain quiet as the verdict was read. The jury then convicted Nema Momeni for the murder of Bob Lee. While the jury acquitted him of first-degree murder, they did find him guilty of second-degree murder. Nema and his attorney remained emotionless as the verdict was read. When asked why the jury went for second-degree murder instead, the district attorney responded with, "Of course, we presented evidence that we thought substantiated a first-degree murder conviction, but at the end of the day, the jury has weighed in with their verdict and we respect what that is. And we do understand, based on the facts, how they might get there." Bob's brother, Tim Lee, said that his family was grateful for the guilty verdict, even though they had hoped it would be for a higher charge. He said, "We know what happened here. We think he had the intent to murder. The jury felt like he did not have the intent coming into that situation. But what matters today is we have a guilty verdict and that Nema Momeni is going away for a very long time." Nema's actual sentencing has yet to take place. It's unknown when it will be decided. When it is, though, it's most likely that he's looking at 16 years to life in prison, according to the district attorney. Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found it interesting, please give it a like, it really helps me out in the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I still have that podcast going with a few of my friends called the NBR Podcast that we do once in a while. If you find this channel interesting, you might like that one too. I also have a merch store now. There you can get yourself some cool Dire Trip t-shirts. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media. If anything were to ever happen to this channel, that would probably be the only way you'd ever hear about it. I also really appreciate when people subscribe to me on Patreon. There you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are up too, and you can get the same benefits there as well. Once again, this has been your host Kyle. Thank you, and good night.